clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m. when Jake heard the sound that made his heart sink. It was the unmistakable noise of a car engine giving up, that wheezing, coughing sound that meant trouble. He was just cleaning up his small auto repair shop, getting ready to head home after another long day. Jake had been running this little garage for 15 years now. It wasn't much to look at, just a two-bay shop on the edge of town with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that had seen better days. But it was his, and he took pride in honest work and fair prices. Most days that was enough. The sound was getting closer. Jake wiped his greasy hands on his coveralls and walked toward the open bay door. Outside, the summer heat was still brutal even though the sun was starting to set. The asphalt shimmered like water, and the air felt thick enough to swim through. A small car came limping into his lot, moving slower than a Sunday morning. It was an old sedan, maybe 10 or 12 years old, with more dents than a golf ball in paint that had faded to an uncertain color somewhere between blue and gray. Steam was pouring out from under the hood like smoke from a chimney. The car wheezed to a stop right in front of the shop. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, but they weren't moving. The engine ticked and hissed as it cooled down, and wisps of steam continued to escape from the edges of the hood. Finally, the driver's door opened with a creak that suggested the hinges hadn't seen oil in years. A young woman stepped out, and Jake could tell right away that she was nervous. Really nervous. Her hands were shaking, and she kept looking around like she wasn't sure she was in the right place. She looked to be in her early 20s, dressed in worn jeans and a college sweatshirt that had been washed so many times, the logo was barely visible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly given up the fight against the humidity. She wore simple sneakers that had clearly walked many miles, and when she moved, Jake noticed she favored her left foot slightly, probably from walking more than she was used to. The woman stood by her car for a moment, staring at the steam rising from the hood like it might tell her what to do next. Jake had seen that look before, the deer-in-headlights expression of someone who knew absolutely nothing about cars and was trying very hard not to panic. Jake grabbed a clean rag and walked over, his work boots crunching on the gravel. He moved slowly, the way you might approach a scared animal. In his experience, people with car trouble were often on the edge of tears or anger, sometimes both. "Evening," he said in his calm, steady voice. "Looks like you're having some trouble there." The woman turned to face him, and Jake could see the worry written all across her face. Her eyes were wide, and she was biting her lower lip. When she spoke, her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Hi," she said, then cleared her throat and tried again. "Hi, yes, I think something's wrong with my car. The tire went flat about a mile back, and then it started making this horrible noise, and now there's all this steam." She gestured helplessly at the car like it had personally betrayed her. Jake took a quick look and immediately spotted multiple problems. The front tire was indeed flat, not just low, but completely flat. The steam told him the radiator was overheating, probably because the cooling system had a leak or the belt was loose. From the way the car had sounded coming in, he suspected there might be other issues too. "I'm supposed to be somewhere really important in about an hour," the woman continued, her voice getting higher with stress. "I can't miss this meeting. It's about my whole future." Jake nodded, understanding the weight of whatever this meeting was. He'd had plenty of customers over the years who needed their cars fixed for important moments. Job interviews, weddings, funerals, first dates. Cars always seemed to break down at the worst possible times. "Let me take a look," he said. "What's your name, miss?" "Amy," she said quickly. "Amy Chen. And thank you so much for even talking to me. I know it's late and you probably want to go home." "Don't worry about that," Jake said, already moving toward the front of the car. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." He popped the hood, and immediately the problem became clear. The radiator was low on coolant, and one of the belts was hanging loose. The flat tire was the least of her problems. This car needed serious attention just to be safe to drive. Jake straightened up and looked at Amy, who was watching him with the intensity of someone waiting for a verdict from a doctor. He could see her counting something in her hand. Looked like crumpled bills from a small wallet. "How bad is it?" she asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. Jake hesitated. The honest truth was that fixing everything properly would cost more than this old car was probably worth. But he could also see that Amy was barely holding it together, and whatever this meeting was, it meant everything to her. "Well," he said slowly, The good news is none of it's impossible to fix. The bad news is it's going to take some work. Amy's shoulders sagged. How much work? I mean, how much money? She held up her small wallet, and Jake could see it wasn't very full. He'd been in this business long enough to recognize someone who was counting every dollar. He'd been there himself years ago when he was starting out and trying to keep his own dreams alive on a shoestring budget. How much do you have? He asked gently, not wanting to embarrass her. Amy's cheeks turned red and she looked down at her feet. About $40, she said quietly. I know that's probably not enough for much, but maybe we could work something out. I could come back tomorrow and clean your shop or something. I'm a hard worker, I promise. Something in her voice reminded Jake of his own daughter when she was struggling through college. That combination of pride and desperation, of someone who was willing to work for what they needed but just didn't have the resources to make it happen. Jake looked at the car again, then at Amy, then back at the car. He thought about going home to his empty house and heating up leftover pizza while watching the news. Then he thought about this young woman missing whatever meeting was so important to her future. Tell you what, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Let me see what I can do. We'll worry about the payment later. Amy's eyes went wide. Really? You'd do that? But you don't even know me. Jake was already walking toward his tool chest. Sometimes that's when it matters most, he said. Jake pulled a rolling cart of tools closer to Amy's car and flipped on the overhead work light. The bright bulb cast everything in sharp detail, making the car's problems even more obvious. Amy stood nearby, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. Is there anything I can do? She asked for the third time in 5 minutes. I feel terrible just standing here while you work. Jake smiled as he loosened the radiator cap with a rag, letting the steam escape safely. Just keep me company. Sometimes that's the most help a person can give. He'd seen plenty of customers over the years. Some paced around demanding updates every few minutes. Others disappeared entirely, leaving him to work in peace. But Amy was different. She seemed genuinely grateful just to have someone willing to try, and that made Jake want to do his best work. The flat tire was the easiest problem to tackle first. Jake rolled the car forward slightly to get better access to the wheel. As he worked the jack under the frame, he noticed Amy watching his every move with intense concentration. You really don't know much about cars, do you? He asked not unkindly. Amy laughed, and for the first time since she'd arrived, some of the tension left her face. Is it that obvious? I can barely check the oil. My dad always said I should learn, but somehow I never got around to it. Nothing wrong with that, Jake said, pumping the jack handle. We all have our strength. I couldn't balance a checkbook to save my life. As the car rose, Jake noticed Amy's shoes again. They were cheap sneakers, but they were clean and well-maintained. Her jeans had been carefully mended in a couple of places. Everything about her spoke of someone who took care of what they had, even when they didn't have much. The tire came off with some effort. It was completely shot. Not just flat, but the sidewall had a gash that meant it couldn't be repaired. Jake walked over to his collection of used tires in the corner of the shop. Most mechanics would have insisted on a brand new tire, but Jake knew Amy couldn't afford that. Lucky for you, I've got something that'll work, he called out, rolling a tire that still had decent tread. It's not pretty, but it'll get you where you need to go. Amy's relief was visible. How much will that cost? We'll figure it out at the end, Jake said, already fitting the tire onto the rim. Let's just focus on getting you mobile first. While Jake worked on mounting the tire, Amy found an old milk crate and sat down nearby. She pulled out her phone and checked the time, then put it away quickly. Jake pretended not to notice, but he could tell she was getting more anxious about whatever meeting she had to get to. So what's this meeting about? Jake asked as he tightened the lug nuts. If you don't mind me asking. Amy was quiet for a moment. It's about my future, she said finally. There are some people I need to meet with about my life changing. I know that sounds dramatic, but it really is that important. Jake nodded. He'd learned over the years that sometimes people needed to talk and some to. As they needed their privacy respected. Amy seemed like she was carrying a heavy secret, but it wasn't his place to pry. With the tire fixed, Jake moved on to the overheating problem. He checked the radiator fluid level, nearly empty. Then he examined the belts. Sure enough, one of them was loose and frayed. This belt's been slipping, he explained to Amy. That's why your engine was overheating. The belt drives the water pump, and if it's not turning properly, the coolant doesn't circulate. Amy watched as Jake tightened the belt and added coolant to the radiator. She asked questions about what he was doing, genuinely curious despite her obvious stress about the time. "You're really good at this," she said, as Jake tested the belt tension. "How long have you been fixing cars?" "Started when I was 16, Jake said, checking his work. "My dad taught me. He always said honest work with your hands was something to be proud of." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," Jake said quietly. "He'd have liked you, I think. He always appreciated people who didn't put on airs." As Jake worked, they talked about small things. Amy mentioned she'd grown up on the West Coast, but had been living here for a few years. Jake told her about how he'd inherited the shop from his father and built it into something he could be proud of. Neither of them shared too much, but there was an easy comfort in the conversation. The radiator repair took longer than expected. Jake had to track down a small leak in one of the hoses and patch it with some sealant. All the while, Amy sat patiently on her milk crate, occasionally checking her phone but never complaining about the time. "You know," Jake said as he cleaned up his tools, "most people would be yelling at me to hurry up by now." Amy shook her head. "You're helping me out of pure kindness. I'm not about to complain about how fast you're doing it." Jake tested the engine, letting it run for several minutes to make sure the temperature stayed normal. The car purred much more smoothly now, though it would never be mistaken for a luxury vehicle. "That should do it," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She'll get you where you need to go." Amy stood up quickly, relief flooding her face. "Really, it's fixed?" "The major problems anyway," Jake said. "That tire patch will hold for a while, but you'll want to get a proper replacement when you can afford it. And keep an eye on the temperature gauge for the next few days." Amy pulled out her worn wallet and counted the bills inside. Jake watched her face fall slightly as she realized she was counting the same small pile of money she'd shown him earlier. "The parts cost me about $15, Jake said, though he was being generous. "The tire alone was worth more than that. Labor's another 10. Call it 25 even." Amy looked up at him with surprise. "That's all? But you've been working for over an hour." Jake shrugged. "Sometimes things work out that way." Amy handed him $30, more than he'd asked for, and Jake started to protest, but she held up her hand. "Please," she said. "It's still not enough for what you've done." As Amy gathered her things and prepared to leave, she paused and looked around the shop. Then she pulled a pen from her purse and wrote something on the back of a receipt. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said, handing Jake the receipt along with the money. "You've saved my entire future tonight, and I'm not exaggerating." Jake looked down at the receipt. In neat handwriting, she'd written, "Some people restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for being one of them." Amy got into her car and rolled down the window. "I promise I'll make this right somehow," she called out as she started the engine. Jake watched her drive away into the night, wondering what kind of meeting could be so important to someone's future. As the taillights disappeared around the corner, he folded the receipt and put it in his shirt pocket, not knowing that this simple act of kindness had just changed both their lives forever. Jake locked up the shop and drove home that night with Amy's note still in his pocket. He kept thinking about the young woman and her mysterious meeting. There had been something in her eyes, a mixture of nervousness and determination that suggested whatever was happening would change everything for her. The next morning, Jake arrived at his shop at 7:30, same as always. He liked the quiet hour before customers started showing up, when he could drink his coffee and plan out the day. But as he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black sedan was parked near his front door. It was the kind of car that cost more than Jake made in 2 years, all polished chrome and tinted windows. The license plate looked official, though Jake couldn't make out the details from where he sat in his old pickup truck. A man in an expensive suit stood beside the sedan, checking his watch. He was tall and well-dressed, with the kind of haircut that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. When he saw Jake's truck, he straightened up and walked over. "Mr. Jake Thompson?" the man asked as Jake climbed out of his truck. Jake nodded, immediately suspicious. In his experience, men in expensive suits usually meant trouble. "That's me. What can I do for you?" The man extended his hand with a professional smile. "My name is Robert Mitchell. I represent Miss Chen. She asked me to stop by and speak with you this morning." "Miss Chen?" Jake repeated, confused. "You mean Amy?" The young lady with the car trouble? That's correct, Robert said, pulling out a leather briefcase. She wanted me to settle her account with you. Jake almost laughed. Account? It was $25 for a tire patch and some radiator work. What kind of account needs a lawyer? Robert's smile became more genuine. Mr. Thompson, I think there's quite a bit you don't know about Miss Chen. Perhaps we could step inside your office and talk privately. Jake unlocked the shop and led Robert to his small office in the back. It wasn't much, just a desk covered in paperwork, 2 mismatched chairs, and a coffee maker that had seen better days. Robert looked around politely but didn't seem bothered by the humble surroundings. Can I ask you something, Mr. Thompson? Robert said as they sat down. When you helped Miss Chen last night, what did you know about her? Jake shrugged. Not much. She was a young woman with car trouble who needed help getting to an important meeting. She seemed like a good person who was having a tough time. And that was enough for you to spend over an hour fixing her car for practically nothing. Sometimes helping people is just the right thing to do, Jake said simply. My father taught me that. Robert nodded and opened his briefcase. Miss Chen values that attitude more than you might realize. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, have you ever heard of Chen Industries? Jake thought for a moment. Maybe. Sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Chen Industries is one of the largest technology companies on the West Coast, Robert explained. They develop software and hardware for major corporations. The company was founded by David Chen in 1985 and is now worth approximately $3 billion. Jake whistled low. That's a lot of money. But what does that have to do with Amy? Robert leaned forward. Amy Chen is David Chen's granddaughter. As of yesterday, her 25th birthday, she inherited controlling interest in the entire company. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at Robert, trying to process what he'd just heard. You're telling me that Amy, the girl with the beaten-up car and $40 in her wallet, is a billionaire? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Robert confirmed. But here's the remarkable part, Mr. Thompson. For the past 3 years, Amy has been living on her own, working minimum wage jobs and driving that old car. Her grandfather's will required her to prove she could understand the value of hard work and honest living before she could claim her inheritance. Jake's mind raced back to the night before. Amy's worn clothes, her genuine gratitude, the way she'd offered to work to pay for the repairs. None of it had been an act. Yesterday's meeting, Robert continued, was with the board of directors of Chen Industries. Amy officially took control of the company at midnight last night. But why are you telling me this? Jake asked, still struggling to believe what he was hearing. Robert smiled. Because in 3 years of living as an ordinary person, Amy encountered hundreds of people. Shop owners, employers, classmates, landlords. And according to her, you're the first person who helped her expecting absolutely nothing in return. Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone would do. That's where you're wrong. Mr. Thompson, most people wouldn't. Amy has been overcharged by mechanics, taken advantage of by landlords, and treated poorly by people who saw a young woman with an old car and assumed she was an easy target. You treated her with kindness and respect. Robert reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Amy would like to make you an offer. Jake stared at the folder like it might bite him. What kind of offer? She wants to invest in your business. Specifically, she wants to fund an expansion of Thompson Auto Repair into a chain of honest, fairly priced auto shops across the region. You would maintain complete control over operations while she provides the capital for growth. Jake's hands shook as he opened the folder. The numbers on the first page made his vision blur. It was more money than he'd ever imagined, enough to build dozens of shops and hire hundreds of people. This can't be real, he whispered. It's very real, Robert assured him. But there are conditions, Jake looked up. What kind of conditions? First, every shop in the chain must operate by the same principles you demonstrated last night. Fair prices, honest work, treating every customer with respect regardless of their circumstances. Jake nodded slowly. That seemed reasonable. Second, Amy wants to remain involved as a silent partner. She believes that businesses work best when they remember their values. And third, Jake asked. Robert's expression became more serious. You have to promise that you'll never compromise those values, even when it would be profitable to do so. Amy has seen too many good people change when money becomes involved. Jake closed the folder and set it on his desk. His head was spinning with possibilities and concerns. Why me? She could invest in any business she wanted. Because, Robert said, Amy believes that character matters more than credentials. She's seen what you're capable of and she trusts you. Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his small shop. He thought about his father, who had built this place with his own hands and taught Jake that honest work was its own reward. He thought about all the customers he'd helped over the years and the ones he'd had to turn away because he couldn't afford to work for free. How long do I have to decide? Jake asked. Amy is flying back to California tomorrow morning, Robert said. She'd like an answer before then. And if I say no, Robert smiled. Then you say no. Amy won't think less of you for it. She knows this is a big decision. As Robert packed up his briefcase and prepared to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mr. Thompson, Amy isn't just offering you money. She's offering you the chance to prove that good business and good character can go hand in hand. After Robert left, Jake sat alone in his office, staring at the folder on his desk and wondering how fixing one flat tire had turned his entire world upside down. Jake spent the rest of that morning in a daze. He tried to focus on the transmission repair he was working on, but his mind kept wandering back to the folder sitting on his desk. Every few minutes he'd glance toward his office, wondering if he'd imagined the whole conversation with Robert. Around noon, his regular customer, Mrs. Rodriguez, brought in her ancient minivan for an oil change. She was a widow who cleaned houses to make ends meet, and Jake had been taking care of her car for 8 years. He always charged her cost for parts and never added labor charges she couldn't afford. You seem distracted today, Jake, she said as he checked her oil level. Everything all right? Jake paused, wrench in hand. Mrs. Rodriguez had become like family over the years. Her kids always drew him pictures that he hung up in his office, and she brought him homemade tamales every Christmas. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Rodriguez? Jake said. If someone offered you a chance to help a lot more people, but it meant everything in your life would change, what would you do? She studied his face with the wisdom that came from raising 5 children on her own. That depends, mijo. Would you still be you? Jake thought about that question for the rest of the day. He worked on 3 more cars, each repair routine and familiar. But every interaction reminded him of what Robert had said about treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances. When 5 o'clock came, Jake still hadn't opened the folder again. He locked up the shop and drove to the cemetery where his father was buried. It was something he did when he needed to think clearly about important decisions. He sat on the stone bench next to his father's grave and finally pulled out the contract. In the fading daylight, he read through every page carefully. The numbers were staggering. Enough money to change not just his life, but the lives of everyone who would work for the expanded business. I don't know what to do, Dad, Jake said quietly to the headstone. You always told me to be careful of deals that seem too good to be true. But what if this one actually is true? A gentle breeze rustled the trees around him, and Jake remembered something his father used to say. Judge people by their actions, not their words. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Amy had shown him who she was the night before. Even when she thought she was powerless and broke, she'd been kind and grateful. Even when she could have easily paid full price, she'd been honest about her limitations. That said something about her character. Jake drove home as the sun set, still no closer to a decision. He heated up leftover pizza and sat at his kitchen table, the contract spread out in front of him. His small house felt especially quiet that evening. Around 9 o'clock, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello, Jake? This is Amy. Jake nearly dropped the phone. Amy, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I hope you don't mind me calling, she said. Robert told me he spoke with you today. I wanted to make sure you didn't feel pressured into anything. It's a lot to process, Jake admitted. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything. I know it must seem crazy, Amy said. Yesterday I was a broke college student, and today I'm calling you about a multi-million-dollar business deal. I keep pinching myself to make sure it's real. Jake could hear the genuine uncertainty in her voice. Despite everything that had changed for her, she still sounded like the nervous young woman who'd needed help with her car. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Why me? You could partner with anyone you wanted now. Amy was quiet for a moment. Do you know how many mechanics I've dealt with over the past 3 years, Jake? Dozens. And every single one of them saw a young woman with an old car and dollar signs in their eyes. They quoted me prices that were 3 times what the work was worth. They talked down to me, assumed I was stupid, tried to sell me repairs I didn't need. Jake winced. He'd seen other shops operate that way, and it always made him angry. But you, Amy continued, you treated me like I mattered. You didn't see a payday or an easy mark. You saw someone who needed help and you helped. That's the kind of person I want to build something with. But what if I mess it up? Jake asked, voicing his biggest fear. What if I'm not smart enough or business savvy enough for something this big? Amy laughed softly. Jake, you've been running a successful business for 15 years. You've built a reputation for honesty in an industry that doesn't always value it. You know more about this than you think. It's just that my dad always taught me to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. Your dad sounds like he was a smart man, Amy said. And he raised a good son. But Jake, sometimes good things really do happen to good people. I should know, it just happened to me. They talked for another hour. Amy told him about her grandfather, who had started Chen Industries in a garage not much bigger than Jake's shop. She talked about her fears of taking over such a large company and her hopes of using her resources to make a positive difference. I don't want to just make money, she said. I want to prove that businesses can be successful while still treating people right. That's where you come in. After they hung up, Jake sat in his kitchen feeling like he had a clearer picture of who Amy really was. She wasn't just offering him money. She was offering him a chance to expand something he already believed in. The next morning, Jake arrived at his shop early. He made a pot of coffee and spread the contract out on his workbench under the bright fluorescent lights. He read through it one more time, paying attention to every detail. At 10 o'clock, Robert returned with Amy. She was dressed simply again, jeans and a sweater, but there was a confidence in her posture that hadn't been there 2 nights before. Still, when she saw Jake, she smiled with the same genuine warmth he remembered. Good morning, Jake, she said. Have you had a chance to think about everything? Jake nodded. I have a few questions first. Of course, Amy said, taking a seat on the same milk crate she'd used while he worked on her car. Ask me anything. If we do this, what happens when you get busy with your new company? What happens if you change your mind about the way we do business? Amy met his eyes directly. The contract gives you complete operational control, Jake. I can't override your decisions about how to run the shops. And if I ever try to change the core values we agree on, you have the right to buy me out at fair market value. Jake appreciated her directness. And what happens to my current customers? Mrs. Rodriguez has been coming here for 8 years. I can't abandon the people who trusted me when I was just a small shop. This location stays exactly as it is, Amy assured him. It becomes the flagship of the chain. Your existing customers never have to worry about anything changing. Jake looked around his father's shop one more time. Then he walked to his office and came back with a pen. All right, he said, uncapping the pen. Let's build something good together. 6 months after signing that contract, Jake stood in front of the newest Thompson Auto Center, watching his daughter Katie cut the ribbon at the grand opening. It was the 3rd location they'd opened, and each one felt like a small miracle. The new shop was bigger than his original garage, but it kept the same honest, welcoming feel. The waiting area had comfortable chairs, free coffee, and a small play area for kids. But what Jake was most proud of was the display case near the front entrance. Inside that case sat Amy's old Honda Civic, the same beat-up car that had limped into his shop that hot summer evening. The plaque next to it read, "This is W." Here it all began, with one act of kindness. I still can't believe that old car's in a place of honor, Amy said, walking up beside him. She was dressed in a business suit now, but she still preferred to sit on milk crates when she visited the shops, and she always remembered everyone's names. It earned its place, Jake replied, watching customers stream into the new location. The car brought us together. The grand opening was busy. Families from the neighborhood stopped by to check out the new business. Jake watched his employees, good people he'd trained personally, talking with customers about their car troubles. Everyone who worked for Thompson Auto Centers went through the same training program Jake had developed. Treat every customer like family. Charge fair prices and never sell someone something they don't need. Mrs. Rodriguez had driven over from the original shop for the opening. Her ancient minivan was finally beyond repair, but Amy had quietly arranged for her to get a reliable used car at cost. Mrs. Rodriguez still brought Jake tamales every Christmas, and now she brought them to Amy too. You know what I love most about this? Amy asked as they watched a young mechanic explain a simple repair to an elderly customer. Look at his face. He's genuinely happy to help, Jake nodded. Finding the right people had been the hardest part of expanding. Not everyone understood the philosophy of putting people before profits. But the mechanics and staff they'd hired shared the same values that had made the original shop successful. I got the numbers from the first quarter, Amy said, pulling out her phone. We're doing better than projected. And we're still keeping prices fair? Jake asked. That was always his biggest concern. Even fairer than the original shop, Amy confirmed. The volume lets us buy parts at better prices so we can pass the savings along to customers. Jake smiled. The business model was working exactly as they'd hoped. By treating people right and building trust in the community, they were attracting more customers than the shops that tried to maximize profit on every repair. A reporter from the local newspaper approached them for an interview. The Thompson Auto Centers had been getting attention for their unusual business practices. Guaranteed fair pricing, free second opinions, and a customer satisfaction policy that bordered on generous. Mr. Thompson, the reporter asked, what's your secret? How do you make money while charging less than your competitors? Jake thought about the question. It's not really a secret, he said. When you treat people honestly, they come back. When they come back, they bring their friends. Pretty soon you have more business than you know what to do with. And Miss Chen, the reporter turned to Amy. Why did you choose to invest in auto repair instead of technology or real estate? Amy glanced at Jake before answering. Because I learned that the most valuable thing in business isn't making the most money possible. It's making a difference in people's lives. Jake was already doing that. I just helped him do it on a bigger scale. After the reporter left, Jake and Amy walked through the new shop. The mechanics were busy with customers, and the atmosphere felt just like the original location. Professional but friendly. Efficient but never rushed. I have something to tell you, Amy said as they reached Jake's office. I've been offered a chance to franchise Thompson Auto Centers nationwide. Jake's stomach dropped. Nationwide? Amy, that's way bigger than anything we talked about. I know, she said quickly, and I told them no. Jake looked at her in surprise. You turned down a national franchise deal? Amy sat down in the chair across from Jake's desk, the same chair where Robert had first explained who she really was. Jake, I've learned something important these past 6 months. Bigger isn't always better. We could probably make Thompson Auto Centers a national chain, but we'd lose what makes them special. What do you mean? You can't train someone to care about customers the way you do, Amy explained. You can't franchise integrity or kindness. Those things come from who you are as a person, and they only work when the business stays small enough for you to be involved. Jake felt relief wash over him. He'd been worried that success would change their mission, but Amy understood what really mattered. So what's next? He asked. We stick to the plan, Amy said. Maybe 10 or 12 locations total, all within driving distance of here. All places where you can visit regularly and make sure they're living up to our standards. And then, Amy smiled. Then we prove that good business and good character can go hand in hand. Maybe other people will see what we're doing and decide to try it themselves. That evening, after the grand opening celebration was over, Jake found himself back at his original shop. The building looked the same from the outside, but inside it had been updated with new equipment and fresh paint. Still, it felt like home. Amy had given him a key to her Honda Civic, which now sat in the place of honor at every Thompson Auto Center. Sometimes, Jake would sit in it and remember that night when a nervous young woman had changed both their lives forever. His phone buzzed with a text message from Amy. Thank you for taking a chance on a crazy idea. My grandfather would have loved seeing what we built. Jake typed back. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't even know was there. As he locked up the shop and walked to his truck, Jake thought about how much had changed in 6 months. He had employees in 3 locations, a business partnership with a billionaire, and more money in the bank than he'd ever dreamed of having. But the thing that made him happiest was simpler than all of that. Earlier that day, a single mother had brought in her car with transmission problems. The repair would have cost $800 at most shops, but Jake's team fixed it for $300 and set up a payment plan she could afford. When she picked up her car, she had tears in her eyes. You have no idea what this means to me, she'd said. I was afraid I'd lose my job if I couldn't get to work. That was why Jake got up every morning. Not for the money or the recognition, but for moments like that. Amy had given him the resources to help more people, but the satisfaction of the work remained exactly the same. As Jake drove home past the billboard advertising the newest Thompson Auto Center location, he smiled to himself. Tomorrow there would be more cars to fix, more people to help, and more chances to prove that treating people right was always the best business strategy. Sometimes the most important things in life really did start with the simplest acts of kindness. All it had taken was one flat tire and one person willing to help, and everything else had followed from there.